Greetings.
So I'm Easty Brown, but I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer Horn, who is our Alabama Poet Laureate, the perfect person to do these introductions. Take it away, Jennifer.
Thank you, Easty. I'm very pleased to be with you all this evening. Thanks so much to Ernest&Hadley. I'm looking in the direction of Easty, which is what you do on Zoom now, right? Thanks so much to Ernest&Hadley for hosting this event. Many of you already know Hank and are familiar with his work, but I'll take just a minute to do a brief introduction. Hank's originally from California. Not everybody knows that. He had a long career as an English professor and administrator at the University of Alabama and is still teaching. During the time he was full-time professor and administrator, he also wrote numerous books of poetry. I think the count is up to 32 now, for which he received not just national but international acclaim, as well as writing significant critical essays on poetry and poetics. His most recent book of poems before this one was titled Poems That Look Just Like Poems. And I have a happy memory of being in a literally full crowded house of Ernest&Hadley the night that he had his reading there. So I'm just sort of summoning that. Hank's work was honored with Alabama's most prestigious literary prize, the 2015 Harper Lee Award for Alabama's Distinguished Writer of the Year. It honors a lifetime of literary achievement. On a personal note, I'd like to say that I'm really proud to have been one of Hank's students back in the day when I was in the MFA program in creative writing at UA. And I have to say, I learned things about poetry and poetics in his classes that I absolutely would not have gotten anywhere else in any other class. And I'm really grateful for that expansion of understanding of poetry in my own life. And I see that Mark Dawson is here as well. He was another student of Hank's, and we've talked about how important that was to us. I'm grateful for this book as well, which I read kind of compulsively all in one sitting, and I expect to go back and do that again. The range and depth of this book just astonish me. To quote Hank in this book, I am glad that every now and then we can have this conversation. So I will turn it on over to Hank. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jennifer. A couple of things as I begin. First, thanks to Easty, not just for this reading and the reading series, but for Ernest&Hadley and for making sure that Tuscaloosa has an independent bookstore. And when the virus recedes, a place for us to gather in numbers once again, and in between, a place for us to safe distance and browse books and buy books. So thank you. And thanks to Jennifer for the generous introduction. It's an unusual book in a few different ways. I wanted to say just a couple of things by way of introduction before I read a good selection from it. I want to thank the people to whom the book is dedicated. To poet Joseph Lease on the West Coast in Oakland, who's mentioned in the book. And Joseph and I have been Zooming and reading back and forth. The last in-person reading that I did was in early March at Moe's Bookstore in Berkeley with Joseph, and we've continued that conversation. The book is also dedicated to Lynn Snow, and thanks to Lynn and our two Zen communities, the Quiet Tide Sangha and the Sunday Zen Meditation Circle, for sitting together, for sharing meditation with one another and conversation during these extremely difficult times in multiple ways. I'll begin by reading the epigraph to the book, which is from the 13th century Zen philosopher, practitioner, poet Dogen, from his essay Fukan Zazenji. He says, "You have gained the pivotal opportunity of human form. Do not use your time in vain. You are maintaining the essential working of the Buddha way. Who would take wasteful delight in the spark from the flintstone? Besides, form and substance are like the dew on the grass, destiny like the dart of lightning, emptied in an instant, vanished in a flash." I especially like that. You've gained the pivotal opportunity of human form. Do not use your time in vain. The other little introductory remark. So the book consists of 5 sutras. The first is called Early Days. What's very strange about this book is usually if one writes a book and then sends it to a publisher, rapid time, the book will appear maybe 2 years or so after you did the writing. This was written March to June of this year. And I called a publisher, poet friend of mine, Bill Lavender, who had published a couple of my earlier books, not so much to get the book published, but to ask, what do I do? These poems are rooted in this moment. And I thought, yeah, if they're published 2-3 years from now, it would just not have the same pertinence to readers or to myself. And Bill said, well, send me the manuscript and I'll take a look. And that was at 10:30 in the morning. About 1:30 that afternoon, he sent me book galleys. And so the book was already laid out. And I'm still not sure he likes the book. He's never said one way or the other, but I do know that he was moved to do the layout and get it in print. And for that, I'm deeply grateful. And as you'll see, it did an absolutely beautiful job. For one of the sections I'll read, I'll see if I can manage share screen. So I'll probably need to have the permission to do that. And I can show you the layout that way when we get to that part. And if it doesn't work, that's fine too. So I'll begin with COVID-19 Sutra number 2, flattening the curve. Moving in the cloud of unknowing, instead I plan Passover dinner. I do not know what is liberation today. What would it mean for all of us to be free from bondage? Instead of lamb's blood, we mark our doors with numbers and distance given us by our sciences. We hurry to find a cure. We hurry to find a vaccine. We hurry to assign blame. We want to know its gene sequence. We want to intervene. Some cities are reopening. In others, the virus has barely arrived. And again, we are not equal to the task. Upturned gold and yellow chalices of the large oak. How is this possible? Then a group of 7 deer scatters, and then a brief skulking silhouette, coyote, moving away along the lake trail up above. I will now or later disappear into this place, perfect hillside, light, shadow, and a view of the pasture, having become this changing light. So you say, beings of the way, cold rain to cold train, pain becomes a window and a doorway. Avalokiteshvara breathes in all suffering and exhales compassion. Will we listen to this moment and change? 3 brown dogs at rest after running the dew-covered hillside. 1 human sits reading and writing, still, in motion. What is happening remains far away and near. Turn, turn again, sweet quatrain of the moment. Once upon a now and again, host to our destruction. Inequality, poverty, and willful ignorance made shamefully visible by the disease. And what will we do? And I don't mean the elusive vaccine, but really, what will we do? Cut our hair, go bowling? A return to normal won't do, as our normal is precisely what is failing us now. The liar is a buffoon. Let this huckster inject bleach into himself. The herd immunity we need is to him. We stand exposed to the virus, yes, and to our own incited fears. All shoulders to the wheel, to love and rescue what we have nearly lost, a habitable, miraculous planet, and our care for one another. If this pandemic is not our clear call to change, then surely all is lost. Behold the day which I can not contain, early morning sun, rise over the pines. What does this or any day have to say? Awakened cosmos, and though we are of it, mostly not awakened to that fact. Pickup truck rumbles the gravel road, incense, coffee, 3 dogs, morning light. Oscillating metric of the big picture, the death count, the projections and the many unknowns, and the immediate present moment. Sudden beauty of its specific characteristics. Here we are, and the whole body is far beyond the world's dust. Apart and together, we gather by means of our devices. How many are truly well? And what does it mean to return? The third sutra is called Phased Reopening. And I'm going to jump over to the fourth sutra, which is entitled, We're Back, with a question mark. We're back? So everything is written in quatrains, 4-line stanzas, but about halfway through the sequence, the pressure of events forces the poem cycle out into long, full sentences and more prose-like composition in some places. So you may even be able to, you can probably hear it as well. So I'll read from the fourth, not all of it, but almost. Actuality is not flat. This morning the voice has not entered me, shadowy light through pines, to see it steadily. Peace and compassion, are these the voice? It itself remains the question. Head, heart, hand, transmission is happening. We could think about it forever. Walking upon the bare ground, I look down. Transparent eyeball, I have no head, I never did. It all passes through me. I am a doorway, a portal, an occasion by which it arrives. Magical catalyst, read this. Remember something else. Mind in tranquility, sees it as it arises. It is place that shelters you. Know one place well. Changing light, seasonal dance of green and gold. This happens to you. We debate the meaning of the numbers. Infection count, death count, caught in a time delay, death of logic, death of rationality. Science becomes something to believe or not. Once that verb gets introduced, it finds itself cast into a space where it perishes. The future has contracted into now and the next few months. Pileated woodpecker pounds the railing of the deck. Whoever told you that observing your mind was easy? I can't live like this all the time. We already are self-driving cars. Nothing so pleasing as that first bowel movement of the day. Hydrangeas are beginning to bloom, and a few gardenias too. Time and change. Listen to the tune underneath it all. Meaning cannot be extracted from daily reality, so don't expect it in a poem. Cascade of overlapping bird calls, traffic, and human activity mix with wind through trees. Who would seize on one thing over another? The visitor insinuates himself among us. He is not from here, not from now. He is not familiar with our ways. Cast a cold eye on life, cast a cold eye on death. Horsemen fly by. It is not exactly how you remember it. The visitor cannot understand what we do to one another, cannot understand why we make such a big deal about our different appearances. Who can name the trees and birds in your own backyard? She is very afraid, but she still has a job and benefits. We call them heroes and essential, but we will not pay them a living wage, nor will we keep them safe. The orange-faced liar with raccoon eyes says, vaccine or no vaccine, we're back. Put your thumbs up and honk your horns. Bar graphs and pie charts serve daily. Just how much can you stand to know? We remain a question to ourselves, questionable, enigma beings, determined to know what being is. And then there is this to deal with, which is too much to think about. Is and it, gnats among bigger words. My life or yours, one among many destined to be forgotten, What is that tapping at the door? It is his odd cadence that I remember, carry forward, or my father's posture, hand on hip, return to the breath, which is everyone's. Beyond the door was much the same. They had quarantined, they had sheltered in, and now the door stood open by order of the liar. Because it is invisible, because it depends upon the telling of science, many pretended it didn't exist. Hydrangeas bloom, gardenias too. Spring turned humid with afternoon thunderstorms. Some asked, who am I? And what really matters? Some learned quickly to love the quiet isolation. Some couldn't stand it and they beat their wives and children. The liar kept naming others to blame for it all. Predictions varied about what will happen in the fall. Some got it right, some didn't. Some said money and greed would determine the plan. 1 million died with no family and no friends at their bedside. Each community in each state handled it differently. Let 1 million deaths bloom. An interwoven tissue, cosmos existing and pushing us toward mutual awareness. Through me and you, writing poems about itself, joy of such moments arising and dissolving. I love this world more than I had thought. It will never be over, it will never go away. Red-bellied woodpecker and white-breasted nuthatch cling differently to bark of the pine tree. It is a test of our cleverness, it is a test of our compassion. The bloom color depends upon acidity of the soil. Like grapes, tomatoes have an exactness of taste specific to variety and location. I retreated from big cities nearly 50 years ago. Melville's The Confidence Man, published on April Fool's Day, 1857, foretold it all. The huckster, the salesman, the liar at the heart of American life. By means of this technology at hand, as a group, we sit together in silence. What is there to see? What is there to say? Now extends its way throughout the universe. We can't see them, but there are plenty of other worlds happening right now. I am glad that every now and then we can have this conversation. I still cannot tell you what consciousness is. There's nothing there. When are you? When called into being? Aware of it before it all gets organized into the already known? Cat at the back door wants in. You know what to do. And I'll conclude with the fifth and final sutra. And it is subtitled, I Can't Breathe. O Lord, the light, I am, as you are, gone over to what is happening now. No way to be outside this invisible and perilous presence. O Lord, the morning light. Just as it is, to see clearly means to know one bird from another. House finch, Carpodacus mexicanus, from purple finch, downy from hairy woodpecker. As in all things, to look closely and slowly. One, and then the other. Who is it beneath that mask? Take joy, for instance. How long does it last? Esther Phillips sings, don't put no headstone on my grave. Early morning high up a pine tree, one, then two, then a smaller third, as I had hoped 3 or 4 weeks ago from the calls I heard in the nearby woods. Indeed, a family of pileated woodpeckers, and I am gone in the watching. They are entrusted to us, and that is how we know the years. All of us immediacy, joy and pain, while the liar inflicts his damage. That is how we know the days. We imagine what it will be like afterwards. Each has a dream, each has a life, and there is also the middle way. I've been doing this for about 50 years, but what he wrote me about the simplest poem made me weep for joy. She is old, it is unclear to me what she is barking at. Writing the facts and figuring out their best sequence turns out to be the hardest of all. In a month, when I turn 70, I may, after 55 years, take a vow to return to playing the piano. You cannot force a child to love something. The liar said, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Said it with an ominous smile on the orange and white face of his. Of course he won't wear a mask, it would be redundant. The gray cat asleep in the chair is equal to or greater than the liar. It must drive him crazy that nothing's own doing, nothing doing, Wu Wei is much stronger than he could ever be. And what would you say, like Avalokiteshvara, all hands and eyes to this morning light, dew bestowed on weeds and wildflowers, ever-changing revelation of the hillside. Tools to see how you are doing at any given point. I recall 2 points determine a line. We have graphs to study. Immediacy is another thing. I study light on the hillside. 3 brown dogs run the hillside, tails quivering, nose to the ground. I amble behind them in my own slow way of knowing this moment, which of course includes the invisible. Police are protecting the governmental structures which the demonstrators wish to burn down. A sentence makes a declaration of independence, of confinement or death, but once it gets started, it must say something. If you are thinking, what pandemic, what virus, simply because you are eating a plate of sauteed garbanzo beans, rainbow chard, shaved Parmesan, cilantro, and fresh linguine, and a crisp white wine, in this moment, you are very right and very wrong. Too many qualifiers, too many ifs and buts. Let's cut to the chase. Or, as my great uncle Leon, a great arguer himself, used to say, give me a one-armed lawyer. I picture Jose up at dawn in his small apartment near Miami, writing the most amazing poems while his beloved Guadalupe prepares breakfast. It seems my 89-year-old mother is always making cheese toast and coffee and taking pills, no matter when we call her. All my sister, all anyone wants is to be listened to, for you to ask her what she is doing. Each sentence is a short story. The liar plays to his base. After running the dew-colored hillside, 3 wet brown dogs sleep on the bare wooden floor while I try to write a few essential sentences. He is a dear friend and a wise one for reminding us that your happiness is your own responsibility. I think with love of 2 poets and their cat Whitman, holed up in a small apartment in Oakland. Away in a manger or way up in space, it all happens at once, holding in mind todos los seres in todos los mundos. All suffering become a transcendental blues. Each day is rich in its specifics. An interruption is not an interruption. It is the content of the day. The bell sounds concluding our meditation. Only recently discovered I have a brother, age 80, traveling the way, hidden in a small apartment near Miami, writing each morning, viviendo y escribiendo la verdad de la casa. Yes, shattered glass, burned buildings. These are the voices of the unheard, mixed in with others intent on something else. In the 1960s, they had infiltrated every group I was a part of. Where is the FBI now? The orange-faced liar stays in his bunker. Around midnight, his anger bubbles over, and he hammers out a string of incendiary tweets. Who calls for calm must be a practitioner of sane. After sitting, then again wake to the world and go out into it, some masked, many not, each imagining and living in a different reality, perhaps as it had been well before this happened. The liar makes it simple. Keep the economy going, protect buildings and businesses, attack those who disagree. If you do not take care of yourself, what else can you do? A sentence still contains within it a poem. Laughter happens as it should. Who was the man who died? And who is his killer? Ask the one with eyes and hands. Ask the one whose heart is breaking. Ask the one who hears their cries. Rest in the openness of mind, so that the words equality, justice, democracy mark something other than our shame. Pain goes straight to our emptiness. Repeated videos enshrine the victims. What to do with 2 viruses? Death of a nation, blurred as I age into what's next. Thank you.
If you would like to ask Hank some questions, you can unmute yourself, or you can ask it in the chat room.
I'll just kick us off with, I'll kick us off while everybody thinks for a second. It's so good to hear Hank reading those poems out loud. And it's particularly apt, I think, in this virtual space for that book. It really is. It's a wonderful book. It reminds me a little bit of the City Lights books. It's small, it's stick in your pocket size, and it's really just the right book to carry around whenever you go somewhere. So I recommend the content as well as the form it's taken. I wanted to ask you, Hank, I think we've all had the same experience, and we've all had a different experience, each in our own different reality. And artists and writers during this time have done what artists and writers do, you know, made art about the experiences that we're all going through. And I know there are several poetry anthologies now with poems about the pandemic. I know a lot of people, including myself, have written 1 or 2 poems about what's happened. But I'm curious how you wrote an entire book in such a short time, and what difference writing those poems has made in your experience of the pandemic.
Good questions. Well, a few things, because I've talked to a lot of different writers and artists, and with the 2 viruses, with Black Lives Matter, systemic racism is one, and the pandemic is another. I really know writers who have gone, and artists in both directions, some who feel incapable of writing, almost with a sense of almost shame and reverence before the moment. How could I write with this, anything that makes sense in relation to the magnitude of these events? And I respect that silence as well. And then there are many poets and artists who are just engaging the present as best we can. I tend to write a lot. It embarrasses me, to be honest. A friend of mine gave me advice. He said, well, don't turn off the spigot. So I take that to heart. I didn't intend to write a book. I never do, actually. I never know what I'm doing, to be quite honest. I write most mornings, and then only later, gradually, do I begin to see what's going on over a period of time. So I didn't say, well, damn, maybe in the next 2 months I can write a book about the pandemic. It was, and why I thank Joseph Least. I wrote what I thought was all I was going to write, and I was reading to him what I wrote in the COVID Sutra 1. And I thought, I didn't know that was not going to be it. And actually it was a couple of sections longer. And he said, do you mind if I tell you the couple of sections I think don't work very well? No, that's fine. Because nothing was set in stone. And so once we knocked out a couple of weak elements, then that set the form. And so I work in invented forms. I make up some form. For the last 13 years, I've been doing that odd shape writing stuff, which seems to have come to an end. And I had who the hell knew I was gonna write quatrains? If you said to me like 2 years ago, you're gonna write a lot of quatrains, I'm still writing hundreds of them now. I would have said, well, you're nuts. That's not a form I really am interested in that much. But once I just take what comes to me and then try to figure out what it is. And so once that shape got set, the only big change was the explosion of sentence-based quatrains. Probably from reading, I was reading Mamie Beersenbrugge's book, Treatise on Stars, and she writes these gorgeous long sentences. And so I thought, well, yeah, I think I need that here. Otherwise, the quatrain, it could get too damn precious, and I thought that would just be not right, too cutesy. So I wanted to do something different. But I didn't know I was writing a book. And so once 5 of them happened, I thought, that looks like a book. So it was kind of at that point that I sent it to Bill to take a look at. I think he was reticent initially because some of my books, the layout's horrific, and so publishers don't, it's really a pain in the ass for them. So he said, well, he asked me, is it bad layout? I said, no, really, it's really pretty easy, just these quatrains step down on the page, and it's not a big deal. So he was willing to look at it. I was shocked that then I had galleys. So then I thought, well, this is a book. And then we moved from there, and now it's in people's hands really quickly, to my surprise.
You'll be happy to know we're on our 2nd order of your books. So it's
Oh, sweet. Well,
yeah.
Bill would be happy to know that. The publisher.
Another dozen coming.
Yeah, I joked them the other day. I said, we might have a hit on our hands. Instead of selling 90 copies, we might break 100. The poetry book, and I don't say it with there's a beautiful thing about the smallness and sort of boutique and non-economic nature of poetry publishing. It's not the production of a product for profit. I'll lose money publishing this book. I bought a bunch and send them to people and that kind of stuff. So it's not, and then other people say it's a gift economy really to some degree, with the exception of bookstores, which is probably also not a way to get rich.
Well, I'll jump in. This is Lynn. Hank, I'm curious, you've said that you write in the morning. Do you meditate and then write, or do you write and then meditate? Or do you do a sandwich of some kind?
It depends on what's happening. My preferred routine would be to get up, get awake a little bit, then meditate and read and write. We have a 9-month-old puppy that's changed a lot of those routines over the last few months. So I'm more apt to get up, go down and play with the dogs, put them outside, deal with them. And then they accommodate themselves to my meditating, and then I'll get to the reading and writing. They kind of calm down and say, okay, that's what this guy does. So they lie down and do it too. Usually meditation precedes the writing. I don't write much at other times of the day, occasionally late evening, but it's almost all early morning. And as you see that in the poems, there's so much.
This is Christy. I would like to know what time early morning. Like how early do you start?
I get up about 6:30 or so, and so the writing's starting by about 7:30. The other different thing that enters into this composition, a few years ago, my wife and I inherited a farm near Carrollton, 200-acre farm that her father, Dab, and her uncle Cooter had owned. And when Cooter passed away, we eventually were able to inherit this farm. So a lot of, when you see things like the pasture and all that stuff, it doesn't come from reading British Romanticism. It comes from spending time in a farm with cows, pasture, and the hill. I'm just flipped out about this hillside. So if anyone looks on Facebook, you'll see I take endless pictures of the same damn location, and it's all about early morning light and late afternoon light. So it's really residence in a specific place. But what's weird about that, if growing up in California, if you had said to me, you're going to fall in love with Alabama, and you're going to spend a lot of time at a farm near a town that has 990 people, a farm down a gravel road, I would have thought you were really crazy. And it's just, I'm sure many of you have lives that also surprise you. But this one surprises me. I'm really quite grateful for it. It comes out in that line of loving the world more than I had imagined or knew I could, which is a burst. And that's just another thought to throw in. That's I think where in some of the impulse for the poem series comes from the strange double life that we live right now of incredible peril, strangeness, and difficulty, and also oftentimes the immense beauty of daily reality. And these two happening kind of side by side. For many people I've talked to, a different relationship to the natural world emerging is something tremendously, whether it's just getting up in the morning and looking at the clouds. People have changed what they see and what they think about what they see. But it doesn't change the fact that horror is right there too. For me, maybe what also compelled the writing, as someone, I refer to myself as covered by the Endangered Species Act. I turned 70, I have high blood pressure. And so when the demonstrations in Tuscaloosa were happening, I really felt horrible about not feeling capable of taking part. And so I needed to find some way to think through and make some contribution to the present situation, even though what I had done ever since I started working in politics as a 12-year-old in 1962 in California, in many other instances, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do that safely. And so I had to do something else.
Hank.
Lynn?
Yeah. I absolutely love the sort of the musical flow of your thought feelings, and then the sudden realization of the outside world sort of coming in, where it's a kind of a distraction from that, and it almost feels like a counterpoint. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yes.
Well, the dogs, the flowers, the birds, and I'm curious to find out if those occurrences actually happened at the time you were writing, or in other words, physically happened at the time you were writing, or how do they come into the poetry?
Great question. So simple answer, physically happened? Yes, always. I make up next to nothing in that regard. And you're exactly right. I think of it, one way an image for it is like a Calder mobile. So there's this musicality of the lyric poetry, the philosophical inclination. I'm really interested in time and being, as everyone knows, consciousness. And then there's the cat at the back door that brings me to that reality. And I'm subservient to them. I serve them. If I want to meditate and they need to go out, they go out. And so but it's a balancing of those different forces. I think for all of us, it's kind of what keeps us sane. There's our political engagement. There's our ongoing fear and learning about the pandemic. There are the people we love and the creatures we love. And they school us in different ways as well. So I respect that schooling. The musicality, yes, that matters to me a lot. I don't want the poems to be either too flat or too precious. It's just got to be. But I do virtually no revision. So it just happens in bursts, which would make me totally, that's why I could never write a novel, for example, or probably even a short story. I don't sustain attention and planning in that way. It's a residence in the moment, which also means I feel like it's very rare. I'm starting to learn to do a little revision again, but I live in that moment, attuned to the moment. And then if I don't feel attuned, I don't write. So I don't write every day. Today, I didn't write today, I didn't write this morning. Rich writes, the word sutra means teaching, or there specific lessons you've learned and or want to impart. like the teachings, is the teaching in the doing. Yes, the teaching is in the doing. But also, so what can it do for you? I don't know. You'd have to answer that for me. I think what I just described in terms of a sort of balancing maybe maybe part of the teaching. At the heart of what I'm doing, the meditation practice has been crucial to everything I do. So maybe that's part of a teaching. I guess what I would hope, John Coltrane had this notion that he wanted music to be a healing force. I feel the same way about poetry. I hope it brings you some peace and health, even while it's confronting what actually is with us right now. I hope that very sincerely. I just heard from some friends on the West Coast near Sonoma who just got the book and read through it and said that. So I thought, oh, bless you, wonderful, thank you. That's the hope. Yeah,
I have a thought.
Sure.
You know, you've told me this before, Hank, but I heard it in a different way when you repeated it a minute ago about really wishing you could have been at the local protests. And I don't know what it is that made me hear that differently now, but I'm glad I did, because it gives me a different insight into your book. Because the whole book feels like a protest rally, right? Because you've gathered so many voices and so many critters, and everybody is there's this gathering omnivorous energy, but that's very focused in a direction of asserting life. In other words, it's a protest rally. In a way the French would talk about what the word, we would say demonstration, the French would say the word manifestation, I think. And, you know, so that gave me a nice lens through which to read again your book. So I appreciate that about your book very much. It's this whole energetic chorus of individual yet harmonized voices.
Well, you know what you're saying, Mark, brings into focus a little more clearly what was going on. I honestly hadn't quite seen it or thought of it in that way, but I think that's true. There's an element of protest built in, and that some of its intensity derives from pain and inability to be physically present. Mm-hmm. The flip side of it is seeing in Tuscaloosa the youth leadership of the political activity really warmed my heart. Really, I found deeply inspiring. Just as I was gonna say a child of the '60s, but obviously I'm not a child. But I'm an old person of the '60s, and that shaped me forever. Taking part in the political activism of the Vietnam era, and I just knew, even from a distance, that the 15 to 30-year-olds taking part in this movement, they're changed for life. Regardless of what happens, that participation will be, I believe, formative. And that gave me a lot of positive sense and hope, even though I couldn't be there side by side. But thanks for your remark, because that clarifies things for me a bit.
I want to thank you, Hank, for being in Tuscaloosa. If you are a local author, and I know we have Hank and Jennifer and probably some other people in here that are local authors. All of you people, anyone you know that is a local author, that's kind of our focus here, is to praise and build you up. So make sure we know we have your book, and that we know if you have something coming out, when it's coming out. So we look forward to doing these, and I'm totally jealous of anyone that had you as a student, Hank. And I know there's a few of you on here. So bless you, and thank you for everything that you've done, and thank you for this wonderful book.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to read. I really miss our being in the same room. I do. I miss the wine and cookies as well. Eventually, that's going to return.
Yes.
I like that. There are some advantages, oddly, to the Zoom world and convenience as well. But again, and Eastie, I'll just be in touch and come by sometime early next week in case there's somebody who wants to have a book signed there that I can sign and we can leave there for pickup or anything else that I can do. And thank you for everyone showing up, listening. Thank you, Jennifer, again for the introduction and all that Jennifer is doing for poetry in the state of Alabama. Couldn't have picked a better poet laureate who's out there doing it.
Absolutely.
Just having us realize the importance and viability of poetry. To those who had me as a teacher, I apologize for my polarity and ardency early on, and that I now see much more clearly that there are a million different ways to do this, and they all have value. But I'm a slow learner, but I've gotten to that understanding, and any of you who write on. Thank you.
Thank you all for attending, and stay tuned for other events that on our website that we will be having over the next 6 months. We do have the book available at the store. Thank you all for coming. This has been terrific. And Hank and Jennifer, thank you so much. Have a good evening.